Dan Goldman walked into the hearing room carrying a stack of death certificates. Across the aisle, Andy Biggs looked up calm and dismissive and called it emotional manipulation. That's when Goldman pulled out the names, 17 of them, reading each one aloud, death by death, in a voice sharpened by quiet fury. Then he asked the question no one in that chamber was ready for pick one. Tell me who should have died to save your budget. Biggs had no answer. The room fell silent. The cameras kept rolling, and a routine budget hearing became something else entirely. Stay with us. Because what started as a debate over numbers ended as a moral indictment broadcast live across the country. The fluorescent lights of the Metropolitan Detention Center, Brooklyn, cast harsh shadows across empty guard stations, their vacant chairs a testament to a system bleeding personnel. In the administrative wing, a single corrections officer moves through corridors that should house 3 times his number, his footsteps echoing like a countdown in the institutional silence. The camera follows Marcus Rivera, a 10-year veteran whose weathered face tells the story of countless double shifts. He pauses at a checkpoint, glancing at his watch, 2:47 a.m., 36 hours into what was supposed to be an 8-hour shift. The radio crackles with desperate calls for backup that won't come, medical emergencies that must wait, and the constant undercurrent of institutional breakdown. We're not guards anymore, Rivera mutters to himself, his voice carrying the weight of exhaustion and moral compromise. We're pallbearers, watching it happen in slow motion. Miles away in a brownstone office on the Upper West Side, Congressman Dan Goldman sits surrounded by manila folders and laptop screens, the blue light illuminating his prosecutor's intensity as he scrolls through Bureau of Prisons mortality reports. Each name represents a life lost, each date a failure of the system he's sworn to oversee. The numbers dance before his eyes, 17 deaths at MDC Brooklyn between 2020 and 2024. Suicide, medical neglect, violence in understaffed units, each casualty tied to a staffing crisis that began with a simple policy decision, the elimination of retention bonuses that had kept experienced officers on the job. Goldman's phone buzzes with a text from his chief of staff. Big scheduled Fox News hit tomorrow says prison bonuses are taxpayer theft. The congressman's jaw tightens. He reaches for a secure phone and dials the Bureau of Prisons. I need every personnel file, every incident report, every death certificate from MDC Brooklyn for the past 4 years, he says, and I need them before dawn. The story Goldman is about to uncover begins not with malice, but with the cold arithmetic of budget cuts. In January 2017, the Trump administration's first budget proposal included a line item that would prove lethal: the elimination of retention bonuses for federal corrections officers' bonuses that had kept experienced staff in one of America's most dangerous and underpaid professions. The decision was framed as fiscal responsibility, $12 billion in wasteful spending that could be redirected to more pressing priorities. But behind the sterile language of budget reconciliation lay a human catastrophe in waiting. At MDC Brooklyn, the effects were immediate. Within 6 months, nearly 40% of corrections officers had resigned or transferred, leaving critical posts unmanned and forcing remaining staff into dangerous overtime rotations. The institution, already strained by overcrowding and aging infrastructure, began its slow collapse into chaos. In Conference Room B of the Rayburn House Office Building, Representative Andy Biggs adjusts his tie and reviews his talking points for the morning's television appearance. The Arizona Republican has built his career on a simple premise. Government spending is inherently wasteful, and every dollar saved is a victory for the taxpayer. Retention bonuses are just union kickbacks with a fancy name. He practices his voice carrying the practiced certainty of a man who has never worked inside a prison. We need accountability, not handouts. His press secretary nods approvingly, but something in her expression suggests unease. She's seen the internal memos, the ones that don't make it into the talking points, the ones that speak of critical staffing shortages and rising violence. But in the ecosystem of political messaging, inconvenient truths are often casualties of convenient narratives. Across the Capitol complex, Goldman's team works through the night assembling a dossier that reads like an indictment. The data tells a story of systemic failure suicide attempts in understaffed units, medical emergencies ignored due to lack of personnel, and violent incidents that escalated because there weren't enough officers to intervene. Each death certificate carries the weight of policy translated into human cost. James Morrison, 34, died by suicide after 3 days in a cell block with no guard presence during night shifts. Maria Gonzalez, 52, suffered a heart attack that went unnoticed for 2 hours because the medical unit was operating with skeleton crew. Anthony Washington, 28, bled to death after a stabbing because the nearest officer was 3 units away. The names accumulate like evidence in a prosecutor's case file, and Goldman recognizes the pattern from his days in the Southern District, a crime committed not by individuals but by institutions that choose to look away. The House Oversight Committee hearing room fills with the usual suspects of Washington Theater Committee members, arranging their nameplate staff members, shuffling briefing books and C-SPAN cameras, positioning for optimal angles. But beneath the routine pageantry lies an undercurrent of tension. Goldman enters with a box of files under his arm, his demeanor carrying the focused intensity of a prosecutor about to make an opening statement. Across the dais, Biggs chats casually with colleagues, his confidence unshaken by the morning's preparation. Chairman James Comer gavels the session to order. Today's hearing will examine federal correction spending and the efficacy of retention programs in maintaining institutional security. The clinical language masks the human drama about to unfold. Biggs speaks first, his opening statement, a masterclass in fiscal conservatism wrapped in the language of taxpayer protection. Mr. Chairman, we're here to discuss what amounts to a $35 million annual giveaway to corrections officers who are already compensated for their work. These so-called retention bonuses represent everything wrong with federal spending throwing money at problems instead of demanding accountability. He pauses for effect, his gaze sweeping the room with practiced authority. The American taxpayer deserves better than union kickbacks disguised as public safety measures. Goldman listens in silence, his fingers drumming against the manila folder in front of him. When his turn comes, he doesn't stand. Instead, he opens the folder and removes a single sheet of paper. Mr. Chairman, my colleague speaks of taxpayer protection and fiscal responsibility. I'd like to speak about 17 individuals who might have a different perspective on the value of retention bonuses if they were still alive to offer it. The room's energy shifts, conversations trailing off as Goldman's words register. He lifts the paper, and even from a distance, the format is recognizable: a death certificate. James Morrison, age 34. Found hanging in cell block C3 on March 15, 2022. The incident report notes that the block had been without guard presence for 4 hours due to staffing shortages. Goldman's voice carries the measured cadence of a prosecutor reading charges. The shortage existed because experienced officers had resigned after retention bonuses were eliminated. Biggs leans forward, his media-trained composure showing the first signs of strain. Mr. Chairman, this is precisely the kind of emotional manipulation that prevents rational budget discussions. Individual tragedies don't change the fundamental waste inherent in these programs. Goldman's eyes narrow, and those who know his prosecutorial history recognize the expression. It's the look of a man about to spring a trap that's been months in the making. Emotional manipulation. Goldman repeats, his voice rising slightly. Mr. Biggs, you're calling the death of James Morrison emotional manipulation. I'm calling the attempt to link individual incidents to broader budget policy what it is: deflection from the real issue of institutional accountability. The exchange has the rhythm of a courtroom cross-examination, each response revealing more than intended. Goldman opens his folder again, removing not one document but a stack of them, each bearing the official seal of the Bureau of Prisons. Let's talk about institutional accountability. Goldman says, his voice dropping to a prosecutorial whisper that somehow carries to every corner of the room. Maria Gonzalez, age 52. Heart attack, unattended for 2 hours. Anthony Washington, age 28. Bled to death waiting for medical response that never came. Samuel Chen, 45. Suicide in a supposedly monitored unit that had no monitors. Each name lands like a physical blow, the accumulation building towards something that transcends political theater. Biggs shifts in his chair, his talking points suddenly seeming inadequate to the moment. These are tragic incidents. Biggs concedes, his voice carrying less certainty than before. But they reflect management failure at the local level, not federal budget policy. Goldman's response comes swift and surgical. Management failures. Sir, how do you manage with managers who aren't there? How do you supervise with supervisors who've resigned? How do you maintain order with a staff that's been cut by 40% on? The mathematics of the situation are undeniable, but Biggs attempts a familiar deflection. The previous administration implemented these changes. We're dealing with the consequences of failed policies, not creating new spending programs. It's a mistake that reveals the poverty of his position, and Goldman pounces with the instinct of a seasoned prosecutor. The previous administration. Goldman's voice carries a note of disbelief. Mr. Biggs, you voted for those cuts. You championed them. You went on television. Goldman reaches for his phone, pulling up a saved video, and called retention bonuses welfare for prison guards. Your words, not mine. The video plays on the hearing room screens. Biggs on Fox News, confidently dismissing the importance of corrections officer retention. The timestamp shows a date 2 weeks before James Morrison's death. The room falls silent, the kind of silence that occurs when political posturing meets inescapable reality. Biggs's face has gone pale, the confident rhetoric replaced by the dawning realization that his words are being used as evidence in a moral indictment. Goldman isn't finished. He reaches into his box of files and removes a thick folder, letting it fall onto the table with a sound that echoes like a judge's gavel. 17 people! Mr. Biggs, 17 human beings who died while cells went unmonitored, medical emergencies went unattended, and violence went unchecked because we decided their lives were worth less than budget savings. He opens the folder, revealing page after page of death certificates, incident reports, and personnel files. The visual impact is devastating. The human cost of policy, reduced to paperwork, yet somehow made more real by its bureaucratic presentation. "I'm going to read their names," Goldman says, his voice steady but carrying an undertone of moral authority that silences the room, "because they deserve more than being reduced to budget statistics." He begins slowly, each name pronounced with careful deliberation. James Morrison, Maria Gonzalez, Anthony Washington, Samuel Chen, Robert Davis, Lisa Kim, Michael Thompson, David Rodriguez, Sarah Johnson, William Clark, Jennifer Martinez, Christopher Lee, Amanda Miller, Jason Taylor, Nicole Brown, Kevin Wilson, Ashley Garcia. The names hang in the air, each one a life lost, a family shattered, a failure of the system to protect those it had confined. Committee members shift uncomfortably in their seats. Staff members stop their shuffling. Even the C-SPAN cameras seem to hold their positions, recognizing the gravity of the moment. Goldman looks directly at Biggs, his prosecutor's instincts reading the discomfort and pressing the advantage. "Mr. Biggs, you've argued that eliminating retention bonuses saved taxpayers $12 billion over 4 years. That works out to approximately $706 million per death. Is that acceptable arithmetic to you?" The question hangs in the air like an accusation. Biggs opens his mouth to respond, then closes it, his media training failing him in the face of moral calculus that can't be spun. "I don't accept your premise that," he begins, but Goldman cuts him off. "It's not my premise. It's simple mathematics. You eliminated bonuses that kept experienced officers on the job. Officers resigned. People died. The connection isn't ideological, it's factual." Goldman stands now, his physical presence adding weight to his words. "But let me make this personal for you, Mr. Biggs. Let me ask you to make the choice you've made for others." He reaches into the folder and removes 17 photograph mugshots from intake family photos submitted by relatives, images that transform statistics into human faces. "Pick one." Goldman says, his voice cutting through the hearing room like a scalpel. "Choose which of these 17 people should have died so your budget could be balanced. Choose whose life was worth less than the retention bonus we refused to pay." The photographs are arranged on the table between them, 17 faces staring up from the polished wood surface. The room has gone completely silent. The only sound, the distant hum of ventilation systems and the electronic whir of recording equipment. Biggs stares at the photos, his political composure cracking under the weight of moral pressure he's never experienced in a career built on abstract policy debates. His hands tremble slightly as he reaches for his water glass. That's not a fair characterization of the policy choices we made." He manages his voice barely above a whisper. Goldman's response is swift and merciless. "Fair, Mr. Biggs, was it fair to James Morrison when he spent his last night alive in a cell block with no guard presence? Was it fair to Maria Gonzalez when she died of a heart attack that could have been prevented with proper medical staffing? Was it fair to Anthony Washington when he bled to death waiting for help that never came? Each question is punctuated by Goldman picking up a photograph, holding it toward Biggs, making the abstract personal and the political moral. You want to talk about fairness? Explain to their families how saving money was more important than saving lives. Explain to their children why Daddy died because we couldn't afford to keep experienced guards on the job. The aftermath unfolds with the swift brutality of social media justice. Within hours, video clips of Goldman reading the names circulate across platforms with hashtags that trend worldwide, which say, their names, budget body count, prison deaths. Biggs's office goes into crisis mode, issuing statements about being taken out of context and ambushed with emotional appeals, but the damage transcends spin. The images of 17 faces, the sound of Goldman reading their names, and Biggs's visible discomfort create a narrative that no amount of media training can overcome. In the corridors of the Capitol, Republicans who supported the budget cuts find themselves avoiding reporters' questions about their votes. Democrats who had remained silent on corrections issues suddenly discover passionate commitments to prison reform. But beyond the political calculus lies a deeper reckoning. In conference rooms across Washington, policy staffers pull up mortality statistics they've previously ignored. Journalists who've covered budget battles for years without considering human consequences begin making calls to federal prisons. Family members of those 17 individuals see their lost loved ones transformed from forgotten statistics into symbols of systemic failure. Goldman walks out of the hearing room past protesters who have gathered in the hallway, not the usual suspects of political theater, but family members holding photographs of the dead, their presence a silent testimony to the cost of policy made in isolation from its consequences. A reporter shouts a question about whether he believes he's changed any minds. Goldman pauses, considering the question with the seriousness it deserves. "I don't know if I've changed minds," he says finally. "But I hope I've awakened consciences." He continues down the corridor past the marble columns and oil paintings of dead politicians, past the architectural monuments to American democracy, toward an exit that leads back to a world where policy becomes reality and statistics become human beings. Behind him, the hearing room slowly empties, but the photographs remain on the committee table, 17 faces that will haunt every future budget discussion, every retention bonus debate, every conversation about the true cost of fiscal responsibility. The fluorescent lights flicker slightly, casting shadows that seem to move like ghosts of the forgotten. On the wall, a brass plaque reads, "House Committee on Oversight and Reform." Words that have taken on new meaning in the aftermath of moral reckoning. Outside Washington continues its endless cycle of hearings and votes, press conferences, and political posturing. But something has shifted in the ecosystem of accountability. 17 names have been spoken aloud in the halls of power, and their echo will resonate long after the cameras stop rolling and the committee room returns to its routine business. The price of indifference has been calculated, and the bill has come due. In the end, it's not the prisons that have rotted, it's the political conscience that allowed people to die in silence while bureaucrats debated the cost of keeping them alive. The names on Goldman's list serve as both indictment and memorial evidence of a system that failed, and a reminder that behind every budget line item lies a human life that hangs in the balance. The hearing ends, but the reckoning has only begun.